Evil and dangers exist in this world. Those who deny this are living in the bubble of their own normalcy bias. A normalcy bias is a cognitive bias which leads people to disbelieve or minimize threat warnings. Most of us have never experienced catastrophic events such as war, starvation, or being held up at gunpoint. Most of us think these things can never happen to us based on our lived experiences, and your normalcy bias continues to live life as usual. This bias can also lead to complete denial when an imminent threat is occurring. Some people will hear gunshots and think firecrackers, even when they see a man running with a gun from the police. Some won't heed the warnings of the approaching storm until they are on their roof, waiting to be saved from the flood. Many of us have a normalcy bias to a certain degree, and in today's video, I want to explore how you can start to train your mind and be better aware of the potential threats that we all may face. What's up, preppers? I'm the Community Prepper. Like always, thank you for watching my channel. Also be sure to give this video a thumbs up, but only if you've gotten some valuable information by the end of it. And please consider subscribing to my channel if you like videos about prepping, firearms, product reviews, and all other topics prepping related. Here in America and many other parts of the world, we've had a rather cushy experience in most of our lives regarding major catastrophes. Things have been historically easy for most Americans over the past many years. Although we've seen world wars, a depression, recessions, some natural disasters, and other catastrophes, we've wholly been able to ride these instances out. Some of you watching right now have been through such instances, and you've probably prepared for the next flood. But perhaps your normalcy bias favors a safe walk home from work or being financially stable for the rest of your life. All I'm saying is that it's easy to get comfortable in areas of our lives where we've never experienced loss or harm. Why do I prep? Why do you prep? Why does anyone prep? I think the answer is pretty simple. I think it's to distance ourselves from the unknown circumstance that could make us uncomfortable or even threaten our lives during emergency situations. You may prep your car to survive being broken down during winter storm or having 6 months of food in storage. Now, I've never been stranded in a snowstorm or without food for more than a few hours. This does not negate the fact that I've prepared for both situations because I can see the potential for those problems. Most of you might wear a helmet when riding your bike. Do you wear that helmet because you've previously had a severe head injury from a biking accident, or to simply prevent you from having a head injury if you do fall? If any of you have ever read Stoic philosophers such as Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, or Epictetus, you'll know the saying about how most of what happens to us in our lives is mostly out of our control. What is 100% in our control is how we react to those instances. When choosing my tagline for my channel, I chose "Refuse to be a victim" for that reason. Choose to prepare now so you won't be a victim later. Choose to grow your knowledge, strengthen your body and mind now so you won't be a victim later. Eat healthy and exercise now so you won't fall victim to obesity and heart disease later. The power to act accordingly in an emergency situation will be predetermined on how you've prepared for that emergency. Having a normalcy bias and living life wearing rose-colored glasses might be setting you up for disaster. If you look around the world lately, you'll see all of the potential major threats we could face. It seems to be a perfect storm. War in the Middle East, war in Ukraine, global pandemics, massive inflation, civil unrest, a political divide wider than it has ever been, food and grain shortages, energy and fuel costs, weakening of the dollar. The list goes on, and I'm not trying to frighten you, but if any one of these situations grows out of control, it could have a domino effect on everything from supply lines to your buying power of essential items we need to survive. The notion that life will go on as usual for the rest of our existence is a false narrative. I urge you to watch my very first video I made on this YouTube channel, where I discuss something called the Tytler cycle. It breaks down how every nation, empire, dynasty, and kingdom before us has had its beginning and ending. Whether that ending was through war, conquest, famine, occupation, or revolution, what makes you think that the United States is immune from ending? In many ways, the United States seems to be at a breaking point on many fronts. Going back to the teachings of Stoicism, We don't have much say in what is happening on a global or national scale, but only how we react to it. Every day I choose to focus on my normalcy biases that I may have. This does not mean that I'm a Chicken Little yelling that the sky is falling, but it helps me train my brain to be thoughtful of the many outcomes that can occur in different situations. Whether it's dressing properly for today's weather or learning open-handed defensive skills to face a threat. Many of us make subconscious decisions in preparation for an ordinary day. The normalcy bias goes outside the realms into disbelieving that nothing outside of the ordinary can or will happen to us. Sometimes when I talk about prepping to people, they actually scoff and say something like, "What are you preparing for, World War III?" These are the kind of people with the strongest normalcy bias. I'm pretty sure these are the same kind of people who live in a permanent bubble and will ignore the warning signs even when their lying eyes deceive them of the approaching storm. To discuss the normalcy bias, we must also discuss something called cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is a mental conflict that occurs when your beliefs don't line up with your actions. It's the uncomfortable state of mind when someone has contradictory values, attitudes, or perspectives about the same thing. The degree of discomfort varies with the subject matter as well as with how well the person copes with self-contradiction. Even when presented solid truths, they'll stick to their lived experiences to counter the action that is right and should be taken. When someone believes that smoking is, in reality, bad for your health, they'll continue to smoke even though there is hard fact evidence that it can lead to death, but they continue to light up. As this relates to prepping, a great example of cognitive dissonance in regard to the normalcy bias is that most people wear sunscreen, drive with their seatbelts on, and dress for cold weather. That's because we've all lived the experience of a sunburn, maybe a car crash, or being chilly in the cold. What most people don't do is store food, carry a firearm, or prepare for the electricity to be off for 2 weeks because they've never personally lived that experience. The normalcy bias with not preparing for the black swan event crossed with the cognitive dissonance of preparing for the normal events in life is a contradiction of two opposing thoughts and practices, but of the same mind. A large part of my prepping includes prepping my mind. When a serious event occurs, there are very distinct ways one reacts. Say you're in a situation where there's an active shooter in a grocery store. You suddenly hear shots being fired, followed by screaming. With regards to the normalcy bias, these are the three phases most of us will go through. How fast you assess the situation and get from stage 1 to stage 3 is of vital importance. Phase 1 is denial. Many people may actually first deny that a disaster is happening. It takes time for your brain to process information to actually recognize this is a disaster or a threat. Phase 2 is deliberation. Deliberation is when you need to decide what to do. If you do not have a plan in place for the specific threat, it can lead to panic. In stressful situations, stress can have major effects on your physical and mental abilities such as panic, tunnel vision, reduced motor skills, and audio exclusion. These effects will slow your decision-making process and can even cause you to freeze, wasting valuable time. Remember that time is vital in emergency situations. More time usually buys you more options. Phase 3 is the decisive moment. The decisive moment is when you need to act quickly and decisively. You could be facing an immediate emergency and not deciding to act could cost you your life. Now that we've gone over all of the major issues with the normalcy bias, what are the ways we can begin to change our mindsets and overcome everyday biases we might have? There are 5 main ways you can begin to assess and overcome most emergency situations. This strategy can be relevant and as something as catching the common cold, extending to getting carjacked, or economic collapse, food shortages, or complete SHTF. This training is used by many companies, survivalists, and the federal government on how to respond to emergency situations. By utilizing the following steps, you will be able to mitigate any emergency situation and how it might affect you. This process can also help rid yourself of normalcy biases you may have by strengthening your critical thinking skills and, more importantly, learning how to wargame or role-play situations. Wargaming is the simple act of thinking how a situation could go south. A simple lesson in wargaming is when you need to get cash out of an ATM. Before you get out of your car, think about how someone could be lying in wait to rob you. The first step is prevention. This step cannot be always utilized in an emergency situation, especially if there's no warning of that emergency. We can only do so much to prevent war, someone robbing us, or food shortages. Think of prevention as akin to wearing your seatbelt, eating healthy, and learning combat skills or carrying a weapon. Prevention can cross over into the planning stage by having evacuation plans, by traveling in groups through transitional spaces, or wearing the right shoes for walking long distances. The second stage is preparedness. Now, if you're watching this channel or this video, I'm sure most of you have a strong grasp on what prepping is. Other ways to describe prepping could be through training, organizing, equipping, evaluating, and planning to take corrective action. Being prepared will lessen the impact of that emergency situation and how it affects you and your family. The third step is response. Your response time in emergency depends on the amount of warning you were given. If you know a storm is coming, you may have hours or even days to respond. The longer time you have to respond usually buys you more options on how to respond. What would be your response if you were suddenly held at gunpoint by someone demanding your wallet? Again, wargaming or role-playing scenarios such as this can better prepare you for how you will respond. The fourth step is recovery. Once the initial threat is passed, it's time to restore some sort of normalcy to personal or communal functions. Were you injured? Was the town flooded? Are there any further threats that may arise during the recovery phase? Remember that in major emergencies, once that initial threat is passed, many people have been negatively affected and might become desperate. During the recovery process, there may be hordes of those searching for food, water, or medical attention, and a number of other things that the more prepared people might have. Don't be surprised if the asking turns into demanding when the people get desperate. The final step is mitigation. The mitigation phase and the planning phase kind of go hand in hand. Once the emergency has passed, you will have the ability to assess damages and the casualties you or your community have endured. You can then take measures to mitigate the effects of a future emergency. A simple example of this is a wildfire. Did that wildfire destroy structures in your community because brush wasn't cleared away from buildings? In your mitigation phase, you can now take steps to create fire lines between vegetation growth and homes and other buildings in your community. Now that you have a better understanding of the normalcy bias and cognitive dissonance, you can begin to train your mind to hasten your reaction time when an emergency might come. Like I stated earlier, part of prepping is also prepping your mind. You may have all the gear and all the guns in the world, but if your mind isn't prepared when that emergency occurs, you may freeze up, you may panic, you may make bad decisions because of your stress response. Wargaming and role-playing different scenarios will allow you better response options when dealing with chaotic emergency situations. All right, preppers, thank you for watching until the end of this video, and I really hope you learned something and enjoyed my presentation. Please be sure to share this video with your prepping community and leave me a comment below. If you leave this video with anything, I hope you've learned that prepping your mind should be just as important as the gear and skills you possess. I do believe that prepping should be a three-sided approach: gear, skills, and mental and physical preparedness. With this combination, the impact an emergency situation has on you will be far less than if you weren't prepared at all. Refuse to be a victim.